Check it out.
No disruptions, not even Peter. Doing a webinar. Good afternoon, I guess, everyone. I hope you had a great lunch. We have a few more people that are just joining, so we will let them get joined in and start here momentarily.
That was pretty fun.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sims. Nice shirt.
Hi, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing well. You can hear me okay, so I'm good to go once we get everyone in the room here, right?
I do. I hear you perfectly. And you're already recording, which is even better.
Very good.
Hey, Josh, I learned in our last meeting that DPS is requiring 39-month MVRs for all new driver packets when you send them in. Did you know that?
No, I did not know that.
Yes. They say they can't access the DOT and DMV site to get driving records. So just a heads up, we're going to ask about it tomorrow when they talk, but they are requesting 39-month MVRs if you send a new driver packet.
Well, and you know that's something that you can get access through MVRSS as a district and run it yourself, correct?
Yes. Yes. Ooh.
All right, a few more people just joining us in the meeting room. We're letting them in here quickly. I believe other than Tommy, everyone else is going to be muted as they enter.
I think they should have, yeah, it was they enter their muted. They should have availability to turn on their camera if they want, or they can unmute themselves as well.
I keep trying to mute you, Tommy, but you have the power to unmute yourself, so that's not working.
Ha 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 ha. Stephanie's tried for years to mute me. It doesn't work.
Okay, so as the last few people are, looks like we have two more people joining right now. But again, TAA would just like to give special thanks to our 2020 conference sponsors, which include ADEQ, Auto Safety House, Braun Ability, Canyon State Bus Sales, Cummins Engines, REI, RWC Group, and the Trust. Their support for this year's virtual platform has allowed us to stand by our commitment to present student transportation information and relevant content to all members. A few more coming in now. For those of you that haven't attended any classes yet today using our platform, you will be muted during the presentation. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box. I'll pause throughout the presentation to answer them or answer them after, or feel free to email me as well at the end of the presentation, and we'll try to get all those questions answered. So once again, this is a TAA class on transportation's role in school evacuation and student reunification. I'm Josh Crosby, the Director of Transportation for Higley School District. I also serve on the TAA board as a vendor liaison this year. And I'm happy to have you guys all here. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. You should all be seeing my PowerPoint presentation with the title slides. So if you're not, please let me know, and audio should be good. So we'll go ahead and get started. School evacuations, it's always something that's on the back of our minds and something that we hope that we never have to use. However, the best way to prepare for something is practice and role play, and that's one thing that the Higley district that I work for has been at the forefront of doing. We have done many drills, both with students and without students, and I'll be walking you through some of the different scenarios, the lessons learned that we've gone through to help try to prepare you guys to put together a policy and procedure for your district. So what you're seeing here are a couple pictures from a drill we did a couple years ago with our middle school students. It was a 7th and 8th grade school with about 1,400 students. What also was contained into the school was a preschool. So we ended up having 3- and 4-year-olds as well as 12 to 14-year-olds. A quick little video here so you can get the magnitude of this. This was a drill that we worked in conjunction with law enforcement. A couple more people coming in. And they actually shut down Power Road, which is a large road for us, to allow the students to walk to the buses. A quick little 10-second video here so you can see the magnitude of what we were faced with that morning. So you can see we have buses lined up all the way down the road. And then as far as the eye could see, we just had students walking from the school to their off-site evacuation. So quite a daunting task, and something that we were thankful that we were prepared for. So let's get into planning and coordination. That is the key to pulling off any of these events. You're going to want to know what your role is prior to it being presented to you. Have something in the back of your mind. Every situation is going to be different. Work with your principals and district office staff. I can tell you that every school in the state of Arizona has an emergency response plan, and in that plan should include their evacuation of a school. And we'll be talking about different types of evacuations to plan for later in the slides. Okay, we talk about primary and secondary. A primary evacuation point is picking them up at school. And a secondary would be where the students actually walk off campus to an off-site location, and the buses would pick them up from there. All schools should already have determined where they're going to go for their secondary location. And though that information should be available to you guys to put in your planning supplies that we will talk about later in the presentation. So if you have 14 schools, you should have 14 primary locations, which is your school site, and 14 off-site locations, which would be parks or churches, movie theaters, etc. So transportation is a critical piece, and it's often overlooked. I know in transportation, we're the last to hear about everything, and they don't realize we're missing until they need buses to move people. Include law enforcement in all of your plans and drills. They love to help, they love to get involved. And just a side note on the pictures that I showed you earlier of us evacuating a middle school, that was a drill that we did in conjunction with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. Once the students exited the building, the law enforcement actually went into this empty school to do a drill of their own while the students were at the park. So it worked out well for them. And just a side note and a funny story to that, they came in with dogs that were bomb sniffing dogs just to do a drill with them. So they went into the empty school and put little sniffers out for the dogs to find and kind of see how that would play out for them. There was a couple middle school students who thought they were drug sniffing dogs. One girl had a panic attack and started crying and ended up confessing to having a little bit of drugs in her backpack, and it wasn't even a drug sniffing dog. So that was our funny story, funny takeaway from that drill. So make sure to include law enforcement in what your plans might be. So we talked about types of evacuations. There can be a slower paced evacuation, which, as you can imagine, could be something like an AC failure or a plumbing issue at a school. Maybe the water got turned off, so you can no longer use the restrooms. There's no sense of urgency to these. And typically these ones, you'll be picking up the students right in the bus bay at their school. Let me admit a few more people here. Sorry about that. So again, that's a slower pace. There's no sense of urgency. The students are not in danger. They might be inconvenienced a little bit, but that's about it. Let's talk about a fast-paced evacuation. That's a little more, time is of the essence. It could be that there's a lockdown at the school and the police are asking for you to get the students off the campus. It could be like an active shooter has occurred and they want to move maybe a school that's in the danger zone away. Some kind of a police issue. Could also be like a gas leak or a natural disaster. On those types of scenarios, you're not going to be taking the buses to the school, and that's where it's key that the principals already know where they're going to take the students to. In our district, we look at a number of different areas, what the resources are at those particular areas. So if you're walking 800 students to a green belt or a park, are there water fountains there? Is there shade? Maybe you're lucky enough to have a church nearby. Typically, you don't want to, you want to remove yourself from the area, and going to another school is not always an option as far as them being close by. So take a look at your district with your principal. Include transportation in that, because buses need to be able to get to those students and pick them up as well. Also, with faster paced drills, you may not keep classes together. When you're loading, you may put exactly 72 or 84 students on there, and that bus pulls out and the next one pulls in. With a slower paced one, you may take the time to keep classes together and keep things a little bit more organized. So we'll go over some considerations from your department, transportation. Communication is really the key. Think about the types of communications that you guys have in your departments and at your disposal. And it's going to include, obviously, your two-way radio. Some of the problems with two-way radios, as you guys all know, everybody on the bus can hear what's being said. Everybody in the other buses can hear what's being said. So a lot of times two-way radios aren't the best piece of communication for emergencies. Those of you that have maybe tablets in your buses are able to send more specific messages that way. But sensitive information over the airwaves only adds chaos to the scene. You may want to consider some kind of additional communication piece between your dispatcher and supervisors. It may even be just the use of a cell phone. Something that the dispatcher can talk to the supervisor with without every other bus driver and every teacher and every student who's on the buses hearing what's going on. How about your available buses? It seems like whenever there's a crisis, your yard is empty or half the buses are out of service with the shop. The buses that are in the yard, do they have fuel? Have they already been pre-tripped? How long is the delay going to take before you can get the buses to the school sites that need them? Would you guys consider canceling a field trip, or maybe canceling some bus runs, or dropping students off in the afternoon if you needed the buses for an emergency? Those are things that should be considered amongst your district staff to find out what the priority is in that moment. I can tell you in the Higley district that if the students are already at school and they're safe, and we have another school that's in distress, they're going to reroute those buses to help the school in distress and keep those students at the safe school where they're at, and we can take them home at a later point. Available drivers is a big one. Most of our drivers work split shift and they clock out and go home. So a consideration would be, what if you have a school that needs an evacuation at 10 in the morning and the majority of your drivers have already clocked out from their morning runs and they are home, or maybe they're at the movies or out shopping? Who do you have available? You should consider it's all hands on deck, which would include any mechanics in your office staff. And bringing back drivers who have clocked out, what would that look like in your district? In the drills that we've done with Higley, we started calling some drivers, and what was really neat, and I think would stand true across the state for all districts, is bus drivers are really caring people. They dropped what they were doing to come back, and many of them actually started calling other drivers and relaying the message before we could even get to the drivers. And on a couple occasions for our drills, we had more drivers available than we actually required to move the entire school. So that was something really neat to see, but something to consider. How would you communicate to get all your drivers back? Okay, some additional considerations. What if you have a bus driver who actually has their own child at the school that you're evacuating? So they may not know what's going on, whether it's a gas leak or an active shooter, but they know something's going on at that school, and now you're asking them to get in a bus and go remove students from that campus. What can you share with that employee? Would you even allow them to help? Are they fit to help? Something to consider that came up in one of our drills. And as you guys know, we are flexible in transportation. It's going to be a rush situation, and you may be asked to do things that may not be entirely safe. They may want to put more students on a bus than the capacity can allow. They may want a special needs student that's normally harnessed in to maybe not be harnessed in and just get them out. So the key is safety, but you have to be fluid and flexible as well. You may not be delivering students. You could be delivering water. You could be delivering food. You might even be transporting parents. And we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about the school reunification or the parent reunification with students. A big one is routing and road closures. If there's something large going on at one of your campuses, chances are there's going to be emergency vehicles there. There may be roads that are closed leading up to the school. Parents could be parked in the bus bays. You could have fire trucks parked in the bus bays. Those are important things to consider when you're developing your plan. You may want to have multiple pickup areas ready for your school sites. I know a lot of our school sites have gates with a fire lane that drives around to the playground that we've talked about that we could open up and use if the front of the school was congested with parents. Keep the buses separate from the parent vehicles. Key questions when a school calls, or maybe your district office calls, you need to start preparing how you're going to make this move. How many students? What are the age groups of the students? How many of them are special needs or wheelchair bound? How many sped buses need to be sent to that location? We learned the hard way without having regular drivers in their specific buses that we would send a mechanic maybe in a sped bus that has 4 wheelchair positions, only to find out that the driver only had tie downs for 2 positions. So it shows up and you're 2 positions short than what you thought you would need. Heat sensitivities, medication, medically fragile students. We have done drills where the students have walked or been pushed in a wheelchair to their off-site, and we had a special needs bus there with the air conditioning running just for some special needs students to stay cool during their practice and drill. So buses can be used as cooling environments as well for the students, and keep that in mind. They have multiple uses. And again, this is one of my favorite pictures from the drill because I thought this day would never end. It was the students kept coming. Again, we did like 1,400 middle school students, which middle school students in general are difficult and hard to work with. But I will say in an emergency situation, particularly when they see sheriff's vehicles and fire trucks, they all followed rules and orders, and it was completely orderly. We even had dance girls that came right out of the dance room and were barefoot. So that was something as well with the heat of the sidewalk that the school had to deal with. So let's talk about drills. In Higley, we did not start moving any students until we were comfortable doing it ourselves. And that's a luxury that I hope all of you have, is that you have time to do drills with just empty buses and drivers before you get into actually needing to do this in real life. And I will say in Higley, we haven't done any drills of any urgency in real life. We've only done them for practice with students. We had one scenario at an elementary school where the water line broke and we had to bus students over to the high school to use the restrooms, and that was about the extent of what we've done for real life. But my suggestion would be to start small. role play on your professional development days. Just ask the question to your staff, hey, how would you guys handle it if a school called tomorrow and said we had to evacuate everyone, or they called in 20 minutes, we had to be there? How would we handle it? Start with your office staff, include your mechanics, and then get it out to your drivers and get their feedback. And like I said, try it without students. Our very first drill that we did involved the use of a school campus, but we did not transport any students. So we did a mock drill. I did not tell anyone on my office staff other than our supervisor that we had to evacuate a particular school. And there was 900 students there in 4 wheelchairs. I let my dispatcher start to do her work. My supervisor and I went out to the school. When the buses started showing up from the staging area, we essentially put 50 students in a mock scenario on each bus just to see how long it would take us to empty that entire campus. So 50 students per bus, we would allow a little time for loading, and we would send the bus off, have them drive over to the other school, double back to get another run if needed. And it was a good training exercise for us to see how long it would take to evacuate the school without students. And like I said, it's important to have the drivers actually drive the route so they can experience the traffic. They get to the other location where they're dropping off the students, and you have another supervisor there that holds them for 3 to 5 minutes, the time it would take to unload the bus, and then send them back. We did another drill with a school where we actually used physical students, but then we incorporated it into a bus evacuation drill, which was really neat. So we did the all call for all of our drivers and aides to head over to a particular school. The students actually boarded the bus with their class. The bus drove around to the back of the school, and then the bus driver conducted a school bus evacuation drill. So the principal was real happy with that. It took a little bit longer, but they killed 2 birds with 1 stone. They were able to test their teachers. We were able to test the drivers, and the students out of class still benefited from the evacuation drill. So that's another great example of something to work with your principals on. Do not share it with your staff that it's a drill. It's hard not to talk about it or prep your drivers in any way. It's kind of nail biting if you know a drill's coming and you hear drivers saying, hey, we're all going out to breakfast, and you kind of want to stall them a little bit, but don't do it. Try to get the real effect of how it's going to be for your staff. When we did it, we do not share any of our drills with our drivers until they get to the school, and then we handed them a piece of paper that said this is a drill, and then with the directions going on from there.
Hey, Josh, real quick. Can we make sure everyone's microphone is muted? We're getting a lot of background from someone sounds like doing dishes. Please.
Yeah, let me hit mute all again and see if that fixes it here. Better? Very good. Thank you, Tommy. And Tommy, I was just looking at the comments here. Do you want to speak to the comment that you just typed in?
Yeah, one thing that we added in ours, and ours aligns pretty closely to what you've been doing, and we're working on a drill for us as well. But one thing we added was, we all know when there's an emergency to school, it doesn't matter if it's the water main break, a gas line, whatever it is, media jumps on it so quickly. And in our ERPs, you're going to have a place that's called for the media to stage, but we all know they're not going to go there directly. They're going to try and get as much recording of the campus as possible from the beginning. So what we do is we've not only the buses are going to evacuate, we try to get as many of them, or the ones we are using evacuate, wrapped around the campus to block any kind of recording as much as possible, just for safety of the students and the staff itself. That's one thing that we've added in there as just that little safety precaution as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Media will show up quicker than you can imagine. We had media requests just to show up for some of our drills to try to figure out what we were doing. And we have no idea how they even found out that there was a drill. Even after some of the drills, we would send out a parent alert saying that it's just a drill. Everything at the campus is okay, because as soon as a parent sees a police car at a campus, they start wondering what's going on. So communication definitely is key there. So back to the slides, incorporating schools into the drills. Have students walk to their offsite evacuation point and then just drive them back to school. I mean, that's a great drill, not only for the students, the teachers, and the principals, but it helps transportation as well. Our principals absolutely love that. They keep it a secret amongst all their teachers, and they go into a lockdown drill, and then they announce over the intercom that they are evacuating the school site to the offsite location. Every teacher is already aware of what the offsite location is and how to get their class there. While that's going on in the background, I am scrambling to get buses on standby to their offsite location. And then all we do is bus the students right back to the front of the school and they get off. So the students are only walking one way to their offsite evacuation, but it's a great drill that incorporates the students, the staff, the administration at the school, as well as the drivers. So let's talk a little bit about reunification. This has been a big thing that's come up in the past, I would say about 3 years. And essentially what this is the students have been taken to an offsite location, and now parents are asked to pick the students up at that new offsite location. So there's a lot of considerations that goes into this. We've done mock drills here at Higley. We have not done anything full scale at all. All we've done is practice, like I said, but there is so much that goes into considering something like this. Everything from technology for the office staff to reunite the correct parent with the student and make sure they're authorized to receive that student, to even organizing the students inside the auditorium. Are they by grade level? Are they by siblings together? Excuse me, by last name sorted alphabetically? How do you keep the students separate from the parents that are showing up? Those are all things that need to be considered. We found running some of our drills that inside the auditorium, the more adult supervision, the better. We've talked about playing a movie inside there, but then it's hard to get the students out when their parents do show up. If they have siblings in multiple grade levels, you're trying to match the siblings up all together, so the parents only have to go through the line once. So there's a lot going on. But what we're going to cover more on this presentation has to do more with what transportation's role would be in that. And what I can tell you is, in this day and age, similar to what Tommy said, but with cell phones, parents can track their students' every movement. So there used to be a time when we could move the students to an auditorium or to another school, get everything set, and then tell the parents to go to that site. In this day and age, parents start showing up immediately because they ping their child's cell phone and they already know where their child is, and they're standing at the doors ready to go before we're even set up to start matching up students to parents. Going back to what we said before, just like when you're picking up the students, you want to keep the buses separate from the parents. We had a couple drills that we observed from a neighboring district where students were yelling out the windows or putting the windows down and waving at their parents as they were driving by. So we're making every effort in our district, as Tommy said, to go behind the buildings whenever possible and block any view of the students from the parents. The parents really should not even be able to see their students until the reunification is complete. Part of our drill is to take students to our Performing Arts Center, and we actually have drapes that we put over the front windows of the building so that parents can't even see in to see the students. We want no contact at all until they are ready to be matched up. Knowing your route of how you're going to evacuate the students out on the road is also key, but it has to be fluid. If it's something like a gas line leak, you may have certain roads that are already closed. And on the fly, you're going to have to put out directions to your drivers of how they need to drive the roads to get there. And I would recommend dictating exactly to the drivers with right and left turns of how they're to get there. You don't want buses loading up at a school and everybody taking their own route to get to the evacuation site. All the buses should follow the same route. You may even get some help from law enforcement if a road is closed, that they would let buses in, or even traffic control, like the slide I had where they closed down part of the road to turn it into a bus bay for students. And that's something that you need to be mindful of, but at the same point, you cannot plan for every event and know every route you're going to take. It's going to depend greatly on the different scenarios. One thing we learned really quickly is once we moved all the students and we felt like we were ready to go back to the bus yard and maybe go to breakfast, that didn't happen. Our people got put into work doing other jobs, either picking up food from another cafeteria or bottled water or helping with crowd control. We even had some of our transportation staff turn into runners of forms and laptops and computers to help them get set up. For the school office to set up their temporary mobile office in front of the Performing Arts building. So just be ready to be flexible and I would say offer your help. One important aspect of transportation is every day things are thrown at us all day long. Every day is different. And so we bounce back quickly. We can process things probably better than any principal can and figure things out because we're used to doing it. Some of the tools to consider when doing school evacuations and reunifications is have a go kit ready. We keep 2 of them here in the Higley district. One of them's in our dispatch office and the other one is in our school vehicle that's used primarily for myself and the supervisor. So we have it in 2 locations that we can grab. And inside that kit, we have an outline of the process that we work through with all of our school principals and site administrators and superintendents and follows the governing board policy. That's really helpful because in the time of an incident, you need some kind of a checklist to know that the proper people were communicated to and that we're following the procedures that we outlined with the principals so they know what to expect. Student count sheets. We've gone both ways with this in our district. Is it the school's responsibility to ensure that the students are accounted for on both sides of the transportation piece? Is it the bus drivers? What do you do if a class has been split? And so Mrs. Jones' class, half of them ended up on bus 1 and half of them ended up on bus 2. How can she keep all that straight? So in our district, we do have count sheets that can be handed to the drivers as just a secondary, I guess, safety measure. But for the most part, the teachers that are on the bus and the staff that's loading them are the ones that are responsible for the counts. We're just doing that as a secondary safety measure. We also have pins, pencils, and clipboards, which pins tend to dry out. So we do go through it once a year and kind of replenish some of that stuff. Keep the important phone numbers in there as well. I think all of us have the principal's cell phones probably in our cell phones ourselves. But it's good to have a district list of maybe who the SPED director is and their cell phone, some of your assistant superintendents or even food service and their cell phone. It's all helpful information, and in the time of the crisis, the more information, the better. We also have a listing of all of our schools as well as what their designated pickup and drop-off locations are. We are lucky enough in Higley to have a huge performing arts center, which can handle any of our schools other than the campus that it sits on. So the majority of our schools will always be taken to the Performing Arts Center. Higley High School, which sits on the same piece of property as the Performing Arts Center, obviously we have to move them somewhere safer and further away. So ours is pretty simple. Higley High School gets moved to our other high school in the district, and everybody else goes essentially to Higley High School. But also keep in mind, you're going to need to know their pickup locations. If a principal says, we evacuated the school, we're on our way to our secondary pickup location, do you know where that is? You should already have a map laid out of what park it is or what church parking lot, wherever it is, so you know, as well as have be familiar with that area to know where you can tell your drivers to stage the buses. You may have a driver a mile away and they may get there quicker than a supervisor gets there. So you may want to have them stage around the corner before they pull up and start picking up students. These are just some notes that's kept, I know it's kind of small, that we keep inside of our dispatch office as well as in the vehicle, like I said. So if a principal calls, we want to know what school it is, how many students, including how many of those are in wheelchairs, where they're going to be going, and the staging area for the buses. I ask my staff as soon as a phone call like that comes in that it gets shared with our entire office staff so that if any phone calls start coming in, everyone in the building is aware that this operation is going on. We require that someone stay in dispatch all the time. I know I had a previous slide that I covered all hands on deck, but even if you have a CDL driver, you're going to need someone in dispatch. They're more important there than behind the wheel at that point. Your dispatcher will start making phone calls over the radio to start getting buses headed that way. And other office staff will start calling and notifying drivers that may not be in a physical bus. They might be in the building. They would also gather up your mechanics and start getting buses pre-tripped and ready to go. It should include all available drivers who are obviously certified to drive a bus. Oh, must have clicked it too early. Staff members, I would recommend your supervisors or a responsible party, maybe a safety or training coordinator, be staffed at both locations, the pickup and the drop-off, to work with the school and with your drivers, and they should have a handheld radio so they can communicate with your buses as well as the school staff. And again, going back a couple slides, cell phones are helpful as well, so that if you need to discuss something that you don't want every student on every bus to hear, that they're not broadcasting that over the radio. So you should also make sure that your buses that may still be running routes know that there's an emergency going on, so they should not have excessive talk on the radio. Buses should radio in when they get to the site and when they get to the drop-off site, and then be directed as to whether they need to circle back around to pick up another batch of students, or if all the students have been moved and they could head back to the yard. You don't want them in a constant loop because that could just create some additional traffic around the schools that you may not need at that time. So communication definitely is key. We have our dispatcher recording which drivers are going, and again, the student counts being recorded by the drivers as well as the staff that's putting the students on the bus as well. One thing that we started in Higley a couple years ago, and it's a work in progress. It was recommended, it may have been recommended by the trust, actually, I'm not sure. But we have an emergency support trailer that's stored here in transportation. And that's one of our responsibilities here in transportation, is managing the trailer in the event of an emergency. Essentially, our trailer contains a mobile office to where we could set up at a park or at a school, at the auditorium, where we have laptops, extension cords, tables, chairs. We have some shade tents. We have the ability to set up 2 portable porta potties, essentially, as well as first aid kits. Pretty much everything you need to reunify students and parents at an offsite location where you may not have internet, electricity, computers, etc. We have everything in there. So it is, it's something that we started and we keep adding to. We have a committee that meets quarterly that reviews the items in there and sees what else we need to add. And like I said, that is maintained here in the transportation department, and we're responsible, or a mechanic or whoever it may be, of taking that to whatever site that we have the issue at. So you don't have to spend a lot of money on something like that. We started small. We picked this trailer up at State Surplus, I think, for around $1,000, and every year we just add a little bit more to it. The IT department keeps their portion up to date, and we do the same as well, making sure everything's good to go. The key is not to have enough items to support a school load of people. So we don't have like a pallet of water in there or anything. It's just simply a mobile office that they can help reunite them and keep things going. And with that, I will go through some of the questions here. If anyone has any other questions, please enter them in. So Teresa's asking, is this organized through the superintendent or principals? So in the state of Arizona, every school is required to have an emergency plan, which includes both on-site and off-site school evacuations. And a lot of the work may already be done. You may not just be aware of it. So I would definitely start with the principals or superintendent and ask them what their emergency response plan includes and what the locations are for that.
There should be one in your office for just the transportation site. You should have an emergency response evacuation plan just for your building as well, even though you're not a campus, because you may have to evacuate your site.
Correct.
So you should have one. And then, Josh, one thing we also did on ours was
Tommy, I think you froze.
driver cert. So we took a list of all of the individuals
Hey,
in our
Tommy?
district. Yeah.
I think your camera froze. We didn't hear about 15 seconds of what you said. So you want to start over one thing you did on your side?
Is that better?
Yep.
One thing we did was, because when we reunify like this, we're not doing home to school, school to home for students, so they don't have to have the school bus cert. We created a list of all employees in our district that had a CDL and that could drive a large vehicle. So I have that list, and every year we get them out and we do like a 2-hour drive with them in the bus to get them used to the big vehicle again. So if I have to, I can use them as well, like our maintenance staff or anything like that that has a CDL.
And they would have a CDL and school bus certificate.
They don't need the school bus certificate because we're not transporting home to school, school to home.
Okay, perfect.
So as long as they have that CDL with the air brake, I'm putting them in a vehicle if I have to as an emergency to drive kids away. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and the other part to my question was interrupting the academic day is really what my question was geared towards, of how that would be organized and orchestrated. So, because the day's being interrupted. So that's why I was wondering who you went through to organize that.
Yeah, good question. In our district, and I think in any district, the lockdown drills have to be practiced just as much as the fire drills that they do. A good starting point, Teresa, would be to work with your principals and maybe incorporate it into a school bus evacuation drill that they're already doing, because that time's already allocated, and maybe it just takes another 10 or 15 minutes where the principal gets to practice their lockdown drill. The principal then dismisses their students out to, say, the football field or something, as if they're evacuating, and then they load on a bus. So that helps your staff practice loading them, drive around to the front of school, do an evacuation drill, and then send them back to class. So that way, maybe the principal would feel like they're getting a little more use out of their time for that. But I think for the most part, principals are really cautious about trying this, but they all want to test their system as well. So I think it benefits them to be involved and practice the drill with the students, maybe walking off campus and getting a ride back. Good
Thank
question. So another question is, how often do we practice these drills? I always try to do one drill with just my transportation department, no students. I let the district office know what's going on. I let the school whose parking lot I'm going to use know what's going on, and we'll do a mock-up and just practice as if we put 50 kids on every bus. And then in our district, we do one larger drill, I would say, per year, and it's only for one school. And then they invite the principals from the other sites to observe and kind of be the critics or critique the drill, so they can see how it goes and prepare for their campus. So we've done 3 or 4 of them in my time at Higley, and they've all shockingly gone better than I could have imagined. But it's always good to keep practicing and work on your skills. So, and Joan from Combs, hey Joan. Yeah, Tommy is going to put all the presentations on the YouTube channel, so this is all available to everybody once the presentations are over. So I'm scrolling through here real quick, and I don't think I see any other questions. Do you guys have anything for either myself or Tommy before we wrap this class up?
I do. I have a question, please.
Sure.
Tommy, when it comes to using non-CDL drivers to transport, does the logo school bus need to be covered?
Well, technically, when we're doing field trips or athletic games, we have to cover the school bus thing. But, I mean, do we do that? No, and I think in the emergency situation, this is something that that little piece right there is going to be overlooked.
Okay.
So, yeah. I mean, unless you cover your school bus sign every time you take a field trip or a ball game, I don't think that's going to be a big deal.
And I guess I have 2 things there, but Tommy, do they need the P endorsement on their license if they're transporting passengers?
Technically they would, but again, when it comes to emergency situation, I'm going to fight that. In my district, we have stood together that we're going to fight that no matter what to get kids off campus. So, but it was just that extra resource. That's the last, if I don't have anything else. But yeah, that's because my mechanics will drive. I won't be driving. Supervisors will be driving. Everyone's going to be driving that can. Last resort is I pull those people that have a CDL, and we just get kids off campus, and then we'll deal with that at the end.
So along those same lines, Tommy, just picking your brain here, but in a true emergency with a sense of urgency, would you ever exceed the capacity of a school bus if they were just driving, say, a mile down the road to another school site?
I think a lot of it, Josh, is I'm going to have to look at the situation.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, the campus is on fire. I'm going to shove them in as much as I can. Huge gas leak. We can be outside where there's fresh air, a water leak, we can get them away. I think it's going to be the emergency itself, unfortunately. And I think that's going to be a case by case thing. And again, I would if I had to. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And I think I'm in the same situation.
Our kids come first. And that's just that's the first and final answer. I think our kids come first. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get them off and get them in a safe place as quick as I can.
Very good. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I appreciate all your time. And if you do have any other questions that you think of after we close this meeting, please feel free to email the TAA email address, and we will be sure to respond to each and every one of you and get you the answers you need. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope you guys enjoyed the experience of the Zooming through 2020 TAA conference.
All right. Thank you
Take
for
care.
everything.
See you in the next session.
All right.